The heat sensor beeped 3 times before Dan Reed bothered to check it. Maintenance workers on Outpost 47 learned to ignore false alarms. Mining equipment threw off weird readings all the time. But this reading showed something hot in Tunnel Section D9, a place that had been sealed off for 2 years. Dan wiped grease from his hands and pulled up the detailed scan. The temperature signature was massive and getting weaker. Something alive was down there and it was dying. He grabbed his toolkit and a portable light, then headed into the restricted zone. The colony administrator would yell at him later, but Dan had spent too many years watching things die on frontier worlds. If he could help, he would. The tunnels grew darker as he descended. His boots crunched on crystal formations that grew from the walls. The moon's geology was strange, full of silicon-based minerals that almost looked alive in the right light. After 20 minutes of walking through cramped passages, the tunnel opened into a cavern so large his light could not reach the far wall. That was when he saw her. The creature lay in the center of a crude nest made from torn metal panels and rock. She was enormous, easily 15 feet long, with scales that shimmered between deep blue and black. Wings folded against her sides, torn and bloody in places. Her head lifted slightly as Dan approached, and he saw the intelligence in her eyes. 3 small shapes huddled against her body. Hatchlings. They were crying, a high-pitched sound that reminded Dan of hungry kittens. The creature's mouth opened, and a mechanical voice came from somewhere near her throat. A translator implant, the kind used during the war. "Human, kill me quick, please." Dan stopped walking. His heart hammered in his chest. This was a Drakish, one of the dragon-like aliens humanity had fought for 5 years before the peace treaty. The colony was built on their former territory. Everyone said the Drakish had left this moon. "I'm not going to kill you," Dan said slowly. The Drakish's eyes widened. "Then take, children, far from here they starve." Dan moved closer, keeping his hands visible. The hatchlings watched him with golden eyes. They were so small, probably only a few weeks old. Their ribs showed through their thin scales. "What happened to you?" "Mate hunted for us, defense guns, killed him 8 days ago." The Drakish's voice cracked through the translator. "I am too weak, cannot hunt, cannot feed them, they will die with me." Dan knelt down a few feet away. The hatchlings made soft chirping sounds. One of them crawled forward slightly, then collapsed. "Where's your clan, your family?" "Exiled we stayed, when others left," elders said. "Choosing peace was cowardice. My mate believed different." She coughed and dark blood trickled from her nostrils. "He was right, but now, we all pay." Dan had grown up on a farm colony where 3 of his siblings died during a famine. He remembered his mother's face when she had to choose which children got food. He remembered the hunger that made you too weak to cry. "What do your children eat?" "Meat, protein, minerals, from native prey." She looked at the hatchlings. "Please take them somewhere, anywhere, let them live." Dan stood up. "I'll be back with food. Don't you dare die on me." The Drakish tried to lift her head. "Human, you cannot." "Watch me." Dan ran back through the tunnels faster than he had ever moved. His mind raced through possibilities. The colony had emergency protein stores, concentrated rations meant for survival situations. This qualified. The storage facility was mostly automated. Dan used his maintenance codes to override the security locks. The AI system asked for authorization. He typed in a request for nutritional supplements, claiming a worker had gotten sick in the deep tunnels. Not entirely a lie. He grabbed concentrated protein blocks, nutrient paste, and a medical scanner. The whole raid took 4 minutes. Alarms would trigger eventually, but he would deal with that later. The run back to the cavern left him gasping. The Drakish had not moved. Her breathing was shallow. Dan crushed a protein block into paste and approached the nearest hatchling. The tiny creature sniffed his hand, then licked the paste. Within seconds, All three hatchlings were climbing over each other to get to the food. "You need to eat too," Dan said to the mother. "They eat first always. Then we do this together." Dan hand-fed the hatchlings in turns, making sure each got an equal share. They were so hungry they bit his fingers accidentally, their tiny teeth sharp as needles. When they finally settled down, curled up together with full bellies, he turned to the mother. "Your turn. I am not worth saving." "That's not your choice." Dan mixed nutrient paste with water and held it out. "You're a mother, your kids need you, so eat." The drakish stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she began to drink from his hands. Dan used the medical scanner while she ate. The readings were bad. Severe dehydration, organ stress, multiple injuries from what looked like defense system burns. She needed more than food. "What's your name?" Dan asked. "Solara." "I'm Dan, and I'm going to help you, Solara, but you have to trust me." "Why?" Her golden eyes searched his face. "Why help enemy?" Dan looked at the sleeping hatchlings. "Because I've been hungry, and because they're just kids, that's enough." His comm unit buzzed. His supervisor wanted to know where he was. Dan silenced it. He had maybe 2 days before someone investigated the missing supplies. 2 days to figure out how to save a dragon and her children without getting arrested or killed. It would have to be enough. Solara's breathing evened out after the third nutrient pack. Dan watched her carefully, checking the medical scanner every few minutes. The hatchlings slept in a pile, their small bodies rising and falling together. "How long since you had water?" Dan asked. 5 days, maybe 6, Solara's translator crackled. "Time blurs." Dan pulled out his canteen and a collapsible bowl from his toolkit. He filled it and set it near her mouth. Solara drank slowly, carefully, like someone who had forgotten what it felt like to have enough. "Your mate," Dan said quietly. "What was his name?" "Thorval. He was strong, brave, foolish." Her eyes closed. "He defied the clan elders to stay here, said our children deserved a world without war." "Sounds like a good father." "The best." A low sound came from her throat, something between a growl and a sob. The defense guns did not even give him a chance. He was hunting rockworms in the deep caves. One patrol sweep and he was gone. Dan had seen the automated defense perimeter. It was designed to keep Drakish away from the colony. No warnings, no second chances, just efficient killing. "I'm sorry." "Sorry does not feed my children." "No," Dan agreed, "but this does." He pulled out the last protein block and split it into smaller pieces. The hatchlings woke at the smell and scrambled over each other again. Dan smiled despite everything. Kids were kids, no matter the species. "You grew up hungry," Solara said. "It was not a question." "Yeah, farm colony on Ross 128B. Bad soil, worse weather. We lost 3 harvests in a row." Dan fed the smallest hatchling, the one he mentally named Pip. "My mom had 7 kids. Only 4 of us made it." "Your mother, she chose who lived." "She tried not to, but when there is not enough food, someone always goes without." Dan remembered those nights clearly. "She gave her portions to us, nearly died herself." Solara's eyes studied him. "This is why you help, you understand." "I understand that no child should die hungry if someone can prevent it." The medical scanner beeped. Dan checked the readings and frowned. Solara's core temperature was still too low. Drakish were cold-blooded but required specific minerals to regulate their metabolism. The nutrient packs helped, but she needed something more. "What did Thorval hunt? You mentioned rockworms." "Silicon-based creatures in the lower caves. Their shells contain minerals we need. Without them," Solara trailed off. Dan thought fast. The moon had extensive cave systems below the colony. Some were mapped, most were not. If he could find these rockworms, he could establish a sustainable food source. "I need to go back to the colony," Dan said. Check some databases, grab more supplies. Will you be okay for a few hours? The children are fed, I will rest. Solara looked at him. You will return. I promise. Humans keep promises. This one does. Dan made it back to his quarters without being seen. He pulled up the colony's geological surveys and started searching. Silicon-based life forms, cave systems, mineral content. The data was scattered and incomplete, but he found references to creatures matching Solara's description. Someone knocked on his door. Dan's stomach dropped. He closed the files and opened the door. His supervisor, Rodriguez, stood outside. The older man's face was hard. Where were you for 6 hours? Personal project. Personal project. Rodriguez crossed his arms. The AI flagged your supply requisition. You want to explain why you needed enough protein for 20 people. Dan met his eyes. No. Reed, I have known you for 3 years. You are a good worker. You follow the rules. You don't steal supplies. Rodriguez stepped inside and closed the door. So either you are having some kind of breakdown or something serious is happening. Which is it? Dan weighed his options. Rodriguez was former military, fought in the Drakish War. He had scars and nightmares from that time. But he was also fair, and he had grandchildren back on Earth. If I tell you, you will probably report me. Try me. Dan took a breath. There is a Drakish in the lower tunnels, a mother and 3 hatchlings. They are starving. I have been feeding them. Rodriguez's expression did not change for several seconds. Then he laughed, a short, bitter sound. You are insane. Maybe. Those things killed half my unit. I know. And you are feeding them. Yes. Rodriguez walked to the window and stared out at the lunar landscape. Show me. What? Show me right now, before I change my mind. They made the trip in silence. Dan led Rodriguez through the tunnels, his heart pounding. This could end with him in a cell or worse. But if Rodriguez was willing to look, maybe he would understand. The cavern appeared and Solara lifted her head. Her body tensed when she saw Rodriguez. The hatchling scrambled behind her. Easy, Dan said softly. He is just here to look. Rodriguez stood at the edge of the nest, staring. The smallest hatchling, Pip, peeked out from behind Solara's wing. The tiny creature made a curious chirping sound. They are so small, Rodriguez whispered. They are bobbies. Pip crept forward, drawn by curiosity. She sniffed Rodriguez's boot, then looked up at him with golden eyes. The old soldier knelt down slowly, extending one hand. Pip licked his finger. Rodriguez's face crumpled. I have grandkids, 2 of them about this size. I know. This is against every regulation. I know that too. Rodriguez stood up and looked at Solara. Can you understand me? Yes, human, the translator said. Your kind killed people I cared about. And yours killed mine. Solara lowered her head, a gesture of respect. But these children know nothing of war. They know only hunger. Rodriguez was quiet for a long time. Then he sighed. We have 36 hours before the inventory audit. Whatever you are planning, Reed, make it fast. Dan felt relief flood through him. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We are both probably going to get court-martialed. Rodriguez headed for the exit, then stopped. But yeah, kids are kids. After he left, Solara looked at Dan. Your people, they can forgive. Some of us, Dan said, when it matters. Dan spent the next morning studying the cave systems. The geological data showed extensive tunnel networks 300 meters below the colony, filled with silicon-based ecosystems. Rockworms, according to the surveys, grew up to 3 meters long and had crystalline shells packed with the minerals Drakish needed. The problem was getting to them, and then killing one. Rodriguez covered for Dan's absence, claiming equipment failures needed immediate attention. It bought them time, but not much. Dan gathered equipment from the maintenance bay: a mining laser, seismic scanner, climbing gear, and a cargo sled. He felt ridiculous. He was a maintenance worker, not a hunter. He had never killed anything bigger than a rat. But Solara needed food, and stealing from the colony could not continue. The hatchlings were stronger now, playing in the cavern. They chased each other around Solara's resting form, tumbling over her tail. Pip was the boldest, constantly exploring the edges of the nest. "You should not go alone," Solara said when Dan explained his plan. "I will be fine. Rockworms are dangerous, fast. Their shells can crush bones." "Good thing I am not planning to wrestle one." Dan checked his mining laser. "I will use human methods." "Which are?" "Being too stubborn to quit and too clever to play fair." Solara made a sound that might have been a laugh. The descent took an hour. The temperature rose as Dan went deeper, and strange phosphorescent fungi lit the walls. He heard movement in the darkness, scraping sounds against stone. The seismic scanner showed a large mass ahead, moving slowly through a side tunnel. Dan crept forward and saw his first rockworm. It was huge, its body made of segmented crystalline plates that glowed faintly blue. The creature moved like a slug, leaving a trail of dissolved stone behind it. Its mouth was a circular saw of rotating teeth, grinding through mineral deposits. Dan's first instinct was to run. His second instinct was to remember Pip's hungry eyes. He studied the creature's movement pattern, slow but steady, following the richest mineral veins. The shell looked impenetrable, but the segments had gaps where they connected. And the ceiling above was unstable, a thin layer of stone barely holding back tons of rock. Dan set up his mining charges carefully, placing them in the ceiling supports. He programmed a delayed detonation, then activated the seismic scanner on maximum power. The pulse would attract the rockworm. He ran to a safe distance and waited. The rockworm changed direction, drawn by the vibrations. It moved directly under the weakened ceiling. Dan triggered the charges. The explosion was deafening. Rock rained down and the rockworm's shell cracked under the weight. The creature thrashed, but more stone fell, pinning it in place. Dan approached carefully, using the mining laser to cut through the gaps in its armor. It took 20 minutes to confirm the kill. Getting the body back was harder. Dan used the cargo sled and every bit of strength he had, dragging the massive carcass through the tunnels. His muscles screamed. Sweat poured down his face, but he kept moving. Solara's eyes widened when he entered the cavern. "You killed a rockworm alone." Dan collapsed against the cave wall, gasping. "Technically, I made a ceiling kill it." The hatchlings swarmed the carcass, but Solara stopped them with a low growl. She approached the rockworm and examined it carefully, then looked at Dan with something like respect. "You used the terrain, smart. We have a saying, work smarter, not harder." Solara began teaching him how to properly prepare the rockworm. She cracked the shell in specific places, extracting glowing blue organs that contained concentrated minerals. The hatchlings ate eagerly, their scales brightening almost immediately. "These minerals," Solara explained, "they regulate our body heat, our metabolism. Without them, we die slowly." Dan watched her eat, noting how her movements became stronger. "How long can you go without them?" 2 weeks, maybe 3, but the children need them every few days." They worked together, storing portions of the rockworm meat in the cooler parts of the cave. Solara showed Dan which organs were edible, which were toxic, how to extract the shell minerals without shattering them. "Your mate taught you all this?" Dan asked. "My mother taught me. Thorval taught the hunting." Solara paused. "He would have liked you. He believed humans and Drakish could coexist." "What made you stay here? Why not go with your clan?" Solara was quiet for a moment. "The elders demanded we teach our children to hate, to prepare for the next war. Thorval and I refused. We wanted our hatchlings to know peace." She looked at her children. The clan called us traitors, exiled us. So you stayed near the human colony. Thorval said if we must be alone, we should be alone near those who chose peace too. Her translator crackled. He was always too optimistic. He was right though, look at us now. The hatchlings had finished eating and were exploring Dan's equipment. Pip tried to bite the seismic scanner. Ash, the middle child, was fascinated by Dan's flashlight. The largest, little wing, kept trying to climb into Dan's lap. They like you, Solara said. I like them too. Dan's comm unit buzzed. Rodriguez. We have a problem. The supervisor's voice was tight. Security found the missing supplies. Investigation team is coming tomorrow. You have maybe 12 hours. Dan's blood ran cold. Understood. He looked at Solara and the hatchlings. 12 hours to figure out a permanent solution. 12 hours to prevent this family from being discovered and killed. What is wrong? Solara asked. We need a better plan. Vast. You should leave, save yourself. Dan looked at her, then at Pip, Ash, and Little Wing. 3 bobbies who had done nothing wrong except be born during a war they did not start. No, he said, we find another way. There is no other way. Then we make one. Dan stood up. That is what humans do. We find solutions everyone says are impossible. Solara studied him. You are a strange species. We get that a lot. Rodriguez met Dan at the colony's outer airlock, his face grim. The investigation team arrives in 8 hours. They are bringing scanning equipment that will map every tunnel within a kilometer of the colony. Dan paced, thinking furiously. Can we move Solara and the hatchlings deeper? Not fast enough. She is still weak and those bobbies cannot travel far. Rodriguez pulled up a map on his tablet. Besides, thermal scans will find them anywhere on this moon. Then we need to make contact official. Are you insane? The peace treaty specifically prohibits. The treaty prohibits hostile contact, military engagement. Dan pointed at the legal text on Rodriguez's screen. But there is a clause for humanitarian exceptions, medical emergencies, protection of endangered juveniles. Rodriguez read the section carefully. It would require approval from the colony administrator and a formal report to both governments. Then we get it. Administrator Wells will never approve this. We make her approve it. Dan headed for the command center. Come on. Administrator Wells was reviewing supply reports when they entered. She looked up, annoyed. Read, Rodriguez. This better be important. We found survivors from the Drakish population, Dan said. A mother and 3 juveniles. They are starving. I have been providing emergency aid. Wells' face went pale, then red. You what? The peace treaty allows humanitarian intervention for non-combatants in life-threatening situations. I am formally requesting official contact status and protection. Absolutely not. Those creatures are dangerous. They are refugees. Dan kept his voice steady. The mother was exiled by her clan for refusing to raise her children as soldiers. Her mate was killed by our defense systems while hunting to feed his family. Now she is dying, and her bobbies will die with her unless we help. That is not our problem. Rodriguez stepped forward. Actually, ma'am, it is. The treaty requires us to report any contact with Drakish survivors and provide medical assistance if requested. Reed has already made contact. If we do nothing now, we are in violation. Wells glared at them both. Where are they? 20 minutes later, Wells stood at the edge of Solara's cavern, flanked by 2 security officers. The hatchlings hid behind their mother, sensing danger. Solara raised her head, meeting Wells' gaze without flinching. You are the leader here, Solara's translator said. I am. These men violated your rules to save my children. Yes. Will you punish them? Wells studied the scene. Solara, still weak but protective, the three hatchlings peeking out with wide eyes, Dan standing between them and the security team. "That depends," Wells said slowly, "on whether you are a threat to this colony. I am a mother. My only threat is to those who harm my young. Your people killed 12 of our colonists during the war. And yours killed hundreds of mine." Solara's voice was steady. "But I do not teach my children to hate. That is why my clan exiled us." Pip chose that moment to waddle forward, curious about the new humans. She sniffed Wells' boot and chirped. Wells looked down at the hatchling. Something in her expression softened. "How old are they?" "3 weeks. And you have been alone since your mate died?" "Yes." Wells was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned to her security chief. "What is your assessment?" The security officer looked uncomfortable. "The mother is malnourished and injured. The juveniles are harmless at this stage. No immediate threat detected." "Can they be relocated?" "Not in her current condition. Moving her could kill her." Wells pulled out her comm unit and made a call. "This is Administrator Wells. I need a direct line to the Colonial Affairs Office. Priority 1. The next 3 hours were a bureaucratic nightmare. Wells negotiated with officials across 3 systems, citing treaty clauses, medical protocols, and humanitarian law. Dan stayed with Solara, feeding the hatchlings while they waited. "Your leader," Solara said quietly, "she is fierce. She is protecting her people, same as you. By protecting mine. Maybe she understands that peace has to mean something, or we are just waiting for the next war." Finally, Wells returned. Her expression was unreadable. "I have received provisional authorization for humanitarian contact. You and your offspring are granted temporary protected status." She looked at Solara. "This means you cannot leave this cavern without an escort. You cannot approach the colony, and any sign of aggression will void the protection immediately." "Understood." "Reed, Rodriguez, you are assigned as official liaisons. This mess is your responsibility now." Dan tried not to smile. "Yes, ma'am." After Wells left, Solara looked at him. "She agreed because of you." "She agreed because it was the right thing to do. Among my people, those who show weakness are destroyed. Your people are different." "Not weakness, strength." Dan watched Pip trying to climb his leg. "It takes more courage to help an enemy than to kill them." Over the next few days, a routine developed. Dan hunted rockworms in the deep caves, bringing back food. Rodriguez managed the political side, filing reports and dealing with bureaucrats. Solara grew stronger, teaching Dan about Drakish culture in return. The hatchlings thrived. They followed Dan everywhere, learning to recognize his footsteps. Pip claimed his toolkit as a toy. Ash loved the sound of his voice. Little Wing just wanted to be held. "They see you as family," Solara said one evening. "Is that okay?" "In Drakish culture, family is defined as those who feed you in darkness, who protect you when you are weak." She looked at her children playing with Dan's equipment. "You qualify." "What does that mean exactly?" "It means you are their nest friend, a bond deeper than blood. They will remember you their entire lives." Dan felt something tighten in his chest. "I will remember them too." A proximity alarm echoed through the caves. Rodriguez's voice crackled over the comm. "Dan, we have incoming ships. Multiple Drakish vessels entering orbit. They are requesting to speak with the colony administrator." Solara's eyes widened. "The clan, they found us." Dan stood up, his heart racing. "How many ships?" "5 armed but not aggressive, yet." Solara struggled to her feet. "You must hide my children." "No," Dan said firmly. "We face this together." "You do not understand. If they find you helped us, then they find out humans keep their promises." The Drakish delegation arrived at the colony's landing platform with military precision. 5 warriors, their scales marked with clan symbols. They were led by a massive male named Ravish, whose scarred face spoke of countless battles. Administrator Wells met them in the negotiation chamber, with Dan and Rodriguez standing nearby. Solara had insisted on coming, despite her weakness. She stood tall, refusing to show fear. Ravish's eyes locked onto her immediately. Solara, daughter of Karesh, you were declared exile. I know what I was declared. Yet you live near the humans, accepting their charity, raising your young in their shadow. Ravish's voice dripped with contempt. Your mate was a fool. Now he is dead and you beg from our enemies. I beg from no one, Solara said. These humans offered help. I accepted. Help, Ravish laughed a harsh sound. They keep you as a pet, a trophy from the war. Dan stepped forward. That is not true. Ravish turned to him, eyes cold. A human speaks, how amusing. Solara and her children were starving. Her mate was killed by our defense systems. We provided food and medical care because it was the right thing to do. Right, Ravish moved closer, towering over Dan. You know nothing of right. You are the species that burned our breeding grounds, that hunted us across 3 systems. And your people killed thousands of ours, Rodriguez said quietly. But the war is over. Is it? Ravish looked at each human in turn. Or do you simply wait for another chance to destroy us? Wells stepped forward. The treaty was signed in good faith. We have honored its terms. By feeding one exile and her doomed offspring, Ravish sneered. How generous. They are not doomed, Dan said. They are healthy, strong, growing. Because you feed them. What happens when you stop, when you tire of this game? Ravish's voice rose. They will starve, and you will watch and do nothing. That is not going to happen. You cannot know that. You are soft, weak. Your entire species values mercy over strength. Ravish turned to Solara. This is what your mate died for, this false hope. Solara's scales darkened with anger. Thorval died believing our children could grow up without war, that they could know a different life. A life of dependence, of shame. A life of peace. There is no peace for the weak, Ravish said. Only survival or death. Dan felt his patience break. You are wrong. Everyone turned to look at him. You think helping others is weakness. You are wrong. You think mercy makes us soft. You are wrong. Dan's voice grew stronger. Yes, we helped Solara. We fed her children. We protected them. Not because we are weak, but because we choose to be better than our worst moments. Pretty words, Ravish said. Not words, actions. Dan gestured to Solara. Your clan exiled her for refusing to raise her children as killers. You abandoned her to die rather than accept change, and you call humans weak. Ravish's scales bristled. You dare. I dare because I am right. Strength is not just fighting. It is choosing when not to fight. It is feeding the hungry even when they are different from you. It is protecting children because they are children, not because they are your species. A younger Drakish in Ravish's group, a female named Kesha, spoke up. The human makes a point. Ravish glared at her. Be silent. No, Kesha stepped forward. I will not. Since we left this moon, our clan has been starving. Traditional hunting grounds are depleted. We are too proud to adapt, too stubborn to learn new ways. How many more will die before we admit Thorval was right? Thorval was a traitor. Thorval saw the future, a future where we must change or die. Kesha looked at Solara. Your children are healthy, how? Dan taught me to hunt rockworms using human methods, tools, strategy, planning instead of brute force. Kesha turned to Dan. You would teach these methods to others. If they want to learn. Ravish snarled. We do not need human help. Then why are you here? Dan asked. You came looking for Solara. You could have just destroyed her from orbit, but you came to talk. That means something. The room fell silent. Finally, Ravish spoke. The council sent us to retrieve Solara and her offspring, to return them for judgment. They are under protection of the peace treaty, Wells said firmly. You cannot take them. Then we have a stalemate. Dan had an idea, a crazy idea, but sometimes crazy was all you had. What if there was another option? Not exile, not return, something new. Explain. Establish a contact zone, designated areas where Drakish can learn sustainable hunting techniques, where our species can cooperate without violating treaty terms. Dan looked at Wells, hoping she would support this. Both sides gain. We learn about your culture. You learn methods to feed your people. Share knowledge with humans, Ravish laughed. Impossible. Why? Kesha asked. Because tradition says so, the same tradition that is killing us. You speak like an exile yourself. I speak like someone who is tired of watching hatchlings die. Kesha's voice was fierce. I speak like someone who wants our people to survive more than I want to preserve pride. Ravish was silent for a long moment. Then he looked at Dan. You would do this, teach us your methods. Yes. Why? Dan thought of Pip, Ash, and Little Wing, 3 Bobbies who deserved to grow up, who deserved a chance at life. Because we remember being hungry too, and we remember those who helped. Something shifted in Ravish's expression. Old pain, old memories. My grandfather told me stories of the Great Famine, when our entire clan nearly died. Another clan shared their hunting grounds, saved us. He looked at Solara. That clan was your mother's. Solara straightened. I did not know. We were taught to forget, to be strong alone. Ravish's voice grew quiet, but perhaps strength comes in many forms. He turned to Wells. I will present your proposal to the council, but I make no promises. That is all we ask. As the Drakish delegation prepared to leave, Kesha approached Dan. If the council agrees, I wish to be first student. Dan smiled. I would be honored. After they left, Solara looked at Dan. You risked much today. So did you, so did Kesha. Do you think they will agree? I think, Dan said slowly, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you need help. 3 months passed before Dan truly believed it would work. The Drakish Council agreed to the contact zone proposal, though with strict conditions. Limited numbers, designated areas, constant monitoring. Ravish remained skeptical, but Kesha arrived with 5 younger Drakish eager to learn. Dan stood in the training cavern, watching Kesha practice the ceiling collapse technique. She had modified it, adding her own improvements based on Drakish strength and reflexes. Good, Dan called out. But remember to check for secondary support columns. You don't want the entire cave coming down. Kesha adjusted her position. Your species thinks in layers, planning upon planning. Your species thinks in direct action. Both have value. A rockworm detection alarm beeped. Kesha moved into position, her movements now efficient rather than wasteful. She brought down the creature in half the time it had taken Dan on his first hunt. Excellent, Dan said. You are ready to teach others. Already, Kesha's scales brightened with pride. The best way to learn is to teach, trust me. Rodriguez approached with his tablet. We have another group requesting access, 7 Drakish from the Northern Territories. They heard about the program. Can we handle 7 more? If we expand to the lower cave systems, but we will need more human instructors. Dan thought about it. The program was growing faster than expected. Drakish from multiple clans were coming, drawn by success stories and desperate hunger. Talk to Wells, see if we can recruit volunteers from the colony. Already done. We have 12 people interested. Rodriguez smiled. Turns out people like the idea of building something instead of maintaining old grudges. In Solara's cavern, the hatchlings had grown significantly. Pip was now the size of a large dog, her wings strong enough for short flights. Ash had developed a fascination with human technology, constantly taking apart Dan's equipment to see how it worked. Little Wing had become the gentle giant, protective of younger hatchlings from visiting families. "They will be adults soon," Solara said, watching them play, "ready to start their own nests." "That is good, right?" "Yes, but they will remember you always," Solara's translator hummed. "Nest friend bonds do not fade." A young Drakish named Torin approached Dan nervously. He was barely older than Pip, Ash, and Little Wing, but already trying to learn. "Instructor Dan, I have question." "Go ahead." "My parents say humans are weak, cannot fly, cannot breathe fire, small claws." Torin tilted his head. "But you survive, you teach us. How?" Dan smiled. "Want me to show you?" He led Torin to the equipment storage area. Inside were tools of every kind, organized carefully. Drakish have natural weapons, claws, teeth, fire, wings. Humans have none of those. Dan picked up a mining laser. "So we make our own." "This is cheating." "This is adaptation." Dan set down the laser and picked up a seismic scanner. "When we cannot do something with our bodies, we use our minds. We observe, we learn, we create." "But we can think too." "Exactly, which means you can use these methods as well, maybe make them better." Dan handed Torin the scanner. "Strength is not just what you are born with, it is what you learn." Torin studied the device carefully. "I understand." That evening, Dan sat with Solara watching the sunset through the cavern entrance. The hatchlings were teaching younger Drakish how to hunt in groups, sharing techniques they had learned from both species. "Your mate would be proud," Dan said. "He would be amazed." Solara's eyes were distant. Thorvald dreamed of peace, but even he never imagined this. Drakish and humans learning from each other, sharing knowledge, building trust. "It started with you. You were brave enough to ask for help." "I was desperate enough." "Same thing sometimes." Administrator Wells approached with news. "The Colonial Affairs Office wants to expand the program. 6 more outposts have requested Drakish cooperation agreements." "That is incredible," Dan said. "They are calling it the Reed Solara Initiative." Wells looked at them both. "You are becoming famous." Solara made an uncomfortable sound. "I do not want fame. I want my children safe." "They are safe, more than safe, they are thriving." Wells pulled up footage on her tablet. "Look." The screen showed Pip teaching a group of young Drakish how to properly use a seismic scanner. Ash was demonstrating tool maintenance to fascinated students. Little Wing was helping a smaller Drakish practice wing control. "They are teachers now," Wells said. "Next generation leaders." Dan felt pride swell in his chest. They grew up so fast. "All children do." Solara's voice was soft. "But these children grew up knowing both worlds. They will be the bridge we could not be." Ravish visited unexpectedly a week later. The old warrior looked different, less hostile, more thoughtful. "The council wishes to make the program permanent," he said without preamble. "That is wonderful," Dan said. "There are conditions. We wish to establish joint training facilities, equal participation from both species." Ravish paused. "And we wish to acknowledge a debt." "There is no debt." "There is." Ravish looked at Solara. "You were right. Your mate was right. We nearly destroyed ourselves defending pride instead of embracing change." He turned to Dan. "Your people showed mercy when we showed none, offered help when we offered only suspicion." "We are not that different," Dan said. "Both our species know hunger, both know loss, both love our children." "Perhaps," Ravish studied him, "but you remembered those truths when we forgot them. That is worth acknowledging." 6 months after that first desperate meeting, Dan stood at the opening of the new joint research facility. Drakish and humans worked side by side, studying everything from ecology to engineering. Children of both species played together in the courtyard. Pip landed beside him, now nearly full-grown. She was beautiful, scales shimmering with health. Ness friend Dan, her translator said, Mother wishes to speak with you. They found Solara in the memorial garden, a place honoring those lost in the war. She stood before a new marker, recently placed. Thorval's memorial, Solara explained. Both governments agreed he deserved recognition. Dan read the inscription. Thorval made of Solara, visionary, father, bridge builder. He never lived to see this, Solara said, but he believed it was possible. He was right. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Pip chirped excitedly. Look, more ships arriving. The sky filled with vessels, both human and drakish, coming for the facility's grand opening. Dignitaries, families, students, all gathering to celebrate what had been built. Dan thought back to that first moment in the caves. A dying mother begging for help, 3 starving hatchlings, one simple choice to care. What are you thinking? Solara asked. I am thinking about how much can change when someone is brave enough to ask, and someone else is brave enough to answer. Solara's scales darkened with emotion. You saved my children. We saved each other. Dan watched the ships land. That is what people do when they stop seeing enemies and start seeing family. Pip spread her wings wide. I want to fly with the new arrivals, show them the facility. Go ahead, Solara said. They watched Pip soar upward, joined by other young drakish and even a few humans in flight suits. Different species, moving together. They will build a better future than we ever imagined, Solara said. They already are, Dan replied. And for the first time in a very long time, he believed it completely.